We're going to try and put all of our strength, just how we have always fought against the gas companies, the mines, and similarly, we'll fight for health issues. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for having come to this call to action, to this call to be able to connect with the Amazon, to be able to connect with the indigenous peoples of the North, and to say that we're all one, that we're not separated, that we're all connected with one same energy, trying to heal those things which by error we've been disconnecting. So we need to again connect, and we need to ensure that our pueblo, our nation, which has been disconnected from nature, that we will again connect, and that we'll be able to be again with our home, with our earth. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Patricia. So now I want to invite anyone who has a question for any of the our panelists today and the people who you saw in the movie, Patricia, Brian, Casey, and Judith. Please use the Q&A feature. You'll see it's there's a place that it says Q&A, and this is separate from the chat window. And that will help me to track and be able to present some of your questions. So as we do that, anyone who has a question, please do use the Q&A feature to ask it. And I will pass to Judith. Would you mind saying whatever is on your heart tonight and introducing yourself?
Yeah, hello, good evening, everyone. Well, I am just blessed to be in a room with Casey for a while now. Like, we've been doing some virtual gatherings, and Brian too, though I've been, you know, in Houston for almost a month now, or in Texas for almost a month, and haven't really been able to be back in Houston. And my heart is with my family right now, and my friends that are in Houston that I haven't been able to see as I would normally you know, be able to do because of COVID-19 and the spikes that are happening. And I haven't been able to visit my community. I was living in New Orleans for a little over a year and had to come back home too because of the spikes there and because of just life situations. And I just, it's been a little challenging to just, you know, stay in motion and stay connected. But I think that's sort of what tends to happen when, you know, these things just end up happening out of nowhere, and things that are out of your control, where you have to just sit still and reflect and really think through what type of movements you need to make, not just for your own health, but for the communities and the organizations that you're committed to growing and building a network with. And I'm just really happy also to be here with Chloe and Catalina, who are part of the Panchalenguas Collective, and being able to see that the language justice work is important in these times to stay connected to our siblings, our brothers and sisters down south. You know, right now, we don't know what's going on down there because we are not able to travel. And so this kind of helps us to further amplify their efforts and stay in solidarity together. And I'm really happy that Patricia is able to join us and share a bit of what's going on in her community too, how we can support and continue to support.
Thank you. Brian, would you like to say anything as a welcome and introduction, and anything on your heart tonight?
Yeah, I just wanted to welcome everyone also. Thank you for joining us. And I'm really interested in the conversation tonight because I actually went to a Lutheran school from kindergarten to 8th grade. And then I went to a Catholic all-boys high school. And I think a lot about the role that theology, organized religion has played on indigenous communities. And I know that, you know, I had a lot of conflicting points of view, even before traveling to South America and other communities all across the US. But being in very rural places and seeing the influence, the heavy arm of evangelicals in, you know, indigenous communities really made me think even harder about the role that religion plays. And you know, I think it's a conversation that's long overdue and probably hasn't happened enough here in the US in particular. And I know that there are a lot of beautiful things too that have helped protect a lot of people through the church as well. And so, you know, I just am really happy to be having this conversation. And, you know, anything I say in from personal experience and from things that I have had to struggle with. So I just wanted to say that at the beginning. And yeah, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So I'm just looking through these questions. There's quite a good many of them. One is to Patricia. There's a question about what the oil companies are doing now in your region and if they have cleaned up any of the oil that they've spilled since the movie. And yeah, also anything else you want to share. I know you're responding to the pandemic, COVID, in your region too. So I think people just want to hear more about what is going on in Seriaku and your region.
Bueno,
Well, we've had a few victories, a few successes to try and stop the continuation of exploitation for petroleum. But it hasn't really dissuaded the government and the companies because they've continued moving forward, pressuring. But people now, as opposed to years ago, know their rights. They've risen up and shown this in a few instances, but we can't really let up at all because in this moment that the pandemic has hit us, we've been stuck in our homes, and we've seen resurgence of this extractive attitude. The huge floods of the rivers in one part of the region closed one of the pipelines that was transporting crude oil. And that contaminated part of the river. And the consequences have been really terrible because the people living next to that river are feeling the impacts of that pollution. And that's a reality. There's some that are directly impacted. There are some that are fighting to defend themselves. And then there's the government and the companies that want to advance the extractive activities. And we're really fighting from our homes in this moment because we can't really leave to protest. But we see that the government and these companies have kind of taken advantage of this situation to advance their agendas. But the indigenous people have started to trust more in their ancestral traditional medicine. They've been gathering plants and roots and starting to strengthen ourselves with these things. We're starting to support ourselves with very basic things in order to get our fevers to go down, things that the government is unable to support us with. And we're trying to look at these leaders and see how we can keep supporting them more and more in this process.
Patricia, one more question for you. In the movie, you speak beautifully about the spirit of the forest and the spirit of life. And I wonder if you have any message about what you feel in that, with how the community, the forest is dealing with, you know, since that footage was filmed 2 years ago. You know, is there a shift? Do you feel like, how is that spirit that you're connected to in the Amazon, and the relationship that you have with that affected by this moment we are in with the pandemic and everything else?
I think the spirit is there, despite the fact that the Amazon has been destroyed, much of it. The spirit continues. And that way of being deeply connected with our territory and our roots has not changed. And the interest, the extractive interest and the interest in exploiting these territories has also not changed. So we've spent decades facing these petroleum exploitation in our areas. We've spent many years stopping this. We've impeded many companies from China, from different countries. They've had to leave in many instances because the indigenous communities know the enormous impact that can be produced from these activities. And this pandemic, independently of all the negative effects it's had, has made us reflect a little more and has made indigenous peoples understand that we need to trust in our ancestral practices. Many people have gone out to the forest to get plants, to wash themselves, to create teas, to help themselves, and that has really helped a lot. It would have been a total disaster if it weren't for that. But these First Nations have been trusting in their ancient medicine, in their cultural medicine. And it's shown us that we have not forgotten. We have been confused at times, but we have not forgotten. And we're going to keep fighting. There is no space to get tired. There's not any space to hold still, and it doesn't even matter if it's a pandemic. We can advance our cases, we can advance legal judgments, we can try to win fights in the government, but we know that they don't want to listen to us. We know that we're going to keep fighting, and we know that we have to be here always as people fighting on the front lines.
Thank you. Gracias. Casey, the next question is for you. How do we get involved with the International Women's Treaty? And also a question of what are you working on now, and anything you have to share about how we move forward together.
Tia, Patricia, it's good to see you. I just love always being with you wherever we might be around the world. Patricia is one of the original signatories on the Women's Treaty as well. There were 8 of us, yeah. And of course, Brian and Yuda. You all mean a great deal to me. I want to acknowledge your spirits and your warrior ways. I appreciate you very much. I'm sure there were questions you asked me, Ali. I've probably forgotten those, but I'm going to just talk a bit. One of the things when this conversation started that I need to say clearly is my deep appreciation for what you call the faith community. There are those that live their faith and understand it from the roots. And there are those who abuse those roots. And part of what needs to happen within Catholicism, in my opinion now, is that not only do you do what you're doing, which is powerful. I do not want to undervalue that. I really hold you up to the best of my ability in prayer. But we need to revoke this doctrine of Christian domination that came about in the 15th century, this papal bull called the Doctrine of Discovery. We need to hold the Catholic Church accountable for the atrocities that it continues to commit in indigenous peoples' territories, either by omission or direct attack. And I think that those of you who are doing the beautiful work that you are now in collecting our energies and our spirits together need to help us to do that. We have to be able to say that that papal bull edict has created this situation that my relative Patricia is dealing with, that my relative Judith, my relative Brian. This hurts me deeply because I want to be one with all of you out there. But as long as there is this type of inequality and oppression that continues to attract wealth to that top 1% that Pope lives in, then we can never be able to do this work together to the depth that the great mystery has asked us to do. So part of this sacred gathering that we have right now is to say this has to change. We have to raise our voices just as we uphold our relatives and Black Lives Matter. We also have to hold accountable those seeds of so-called power, because the idea that they could locate land that's inhabited by indigenous people and they have a right of domination over the lands and the sources that they call resources, that we call sources of life, and say that belongs to them, and whatever the peoples there belong to them also, creates the situation that my relative Patricia's living in right now, creates the situation in Houston where all the pipelines are flowing down there and drowning their air, their sacred waters and their lands. And thank you for allowing me to say these things, because it's a very real open wound that has to be healed in a real way. And I'm sure I totally overlooked your question. I know part of it is, what am I doing now? So I will go there. I virtually am sitting in the country and relearning and reliving what needs to be done. Although in this virtual world that we're sharing at this moment, I'm working on something called the rights of nature, which is a simple way of recognizing what always has been and always will be, is that nature and us are indivisible. We belong to each other. We are part of one another. There is no separation between us. And indeed, from the Southern Hemisphere, I heard the beautiful phrase that I repeat often, that we are not here protecting nature, doing these rights of nature work. We are nature protecting itself. And so by understanding that philosophy, we are in Ponca Nation, we have a statute that is our form of law that says that we recognize that all nature has the right to be. And by recognizing this within a statute, it gives us another tool to be able to deal with the extractive industry in a very lawful way. They have also, during this time of domination or attempted domination, created laws around how we should live, put us on POW camps called reservations, robbed us of our language, of our places of tradition and custom and land that we're connected to. And so in order to try to reverse these trends of 500 years, we are creating these statutes that are our way of saying land back, that the deer and the raccoons and those that swim in the waters and the water herself, that the air itself are beings, entities that have a right to life. And if you interfere, you extractive industry people, we're going to take you to a court of law and deal with you. And it won't be federal, it won't be state, it will be the Ponca court where we have jurisdiction. And it's pushing sovereignty back into the places where it should be. It's pushing laws back against those
Debería haber existido desde siempre y está usando nuestras propias leyes contra las personas que usarían sus leyes contra.
You might be able to help me explain better, but I believe that people like Penny Opal Plant have posted that online where you can find it. Maybe you go to Movement Rights, maybe you go to International Indigenous Women's Treaty, and I'm not all that computer literate, and you find the words there. But it is a very binding spiritually treaty that is about prayer, that is about love, that is about standing together within the ethereal realm of prayer and bringing back the balance, or at least trying to get humans involved in the balance and being part of the sacred system of life rather than feeling separate from and attempting to feel superior to. You know, us humans, we're just pitiful. We are so mixed up in so many ways. And I was told when I was young that with a shrug of her shoulder, Mother Earth could shake humans free from her and we would no longer exist. And it could be that that time is now. So we have to align ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. I wonder if you could speak to the planting of sacred corn in the path of the Keystone Pipeline. And I know many of the people here have probably been following the Keystone for years, but what can you tell us about where that struggle stands and that, you know, yeah, just that ceremony. Could you share the story of that ceremony with us, please?
I could share so much. It's really difficult to not just jump in and stay on here a bit. First of all, we need to start divestment. We need to divest from the Keystone XL from TransCanada, or what is it now, TC Energy. And we need to demand that the banks divest from that. We need to demand that Liberty Mutual not insure that. And we need people to call in and to make this happen, write in, bug them until there's millions of us saying, you stupid fools. The earth is regaining her sacredness through the conscious soil are sacred. They belong in the earth. Leave them alone. first and foremost, we have to look that way. Secondly, this is a situation that human beings control. And so we do have a choice in whether it continues. And in one manner, my son Mikasi had a dream one night after we'd had a treaty council with, I believe it was 29 tribes in the northern part of Turtle Island, where we'd all signed a treaty of 1854 that was between the Yankton and the Ponca. We knew that we had never abrogated that treaty, and the United States had. So therefore, we wanted to say we hold that treaty still sacred between ourselves, just as the indigenous women hold that treaty between themselves as a sacred entity. And we are going to utilize that treaty to stop KXL. So after all of us signed that, and it was the beginning of the Cowboy and Indian Alliance reconnection, or the new CIA, where we made partnership with a rancher and farmers that are now the caretakers of the sacred land that the Poncas once lived on. Well, we had come home, but my son was still up there in a camp to stop KXL. And he had a dream about planting our sacred corn along the route of the pipeline. And in doing so, making that a stance of a sacred site that we could challenge again the lawfulness of this multinational group coming through and defiling the sacred water and the sacred earth and all of those things. So in the Cowboy and Indian Alliance, two of the people, Art and Helen Tandrup, said, you must come to our ranch and camp there. And my son did. And come to find out that very ranch was a place that we call our Trail of Tears, went through there. My grandpa was 8 years old in that forced removal. 1 in 3 of our people died on that trip, and we're a small tribe. And so we know the blood of our people all right along that trail. And they said, if you want to plant here, plant here. And my son had a dream again about a song that was part of the ceremony of the corn, of the 4 colors of corn. And there are a few other colors, but the 4 colors. And so that began a yearly planting, a said ceremony that he conducted up there. And by doing so, the Department of Agriculture had to recognize that corn as sacred Ponca corn. And by doing that, that created the sacred site so that we have another way to tell TC Energy not coming here.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that story with us. So there's a question for Judith and for Brian, and it's the question of how did the travel to these other communities that you did in the film, how did it affect you and the work that you do and the way that you move through the world and through your efforts? And also, if you want to share any other details about what you're up to now, that's something that that was asked of every panelist. So yeah, and Judith in particular, there's another question about youth activism, and I know that that's an area you've done a lot of work in. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a story of the power of youth activism, I think people would love to hear that too.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think, us traveling to these different communities definitely had a big impact in our lives, in the way that we move in community, the way that we actually embody that respect and solidarity that these communities, needed at the moment and the times, and also in the future. I mean, for me personally, it was sort of like a paradigm shift for me, to witness for myself, even going to Canada at the extraction point of the tar sands, where before these tar sands were just sort of a myth. For me, I didn't know where they came from or how they were extracted and what were the physical ailments that people had to go through for that to take place. And visiting it, made me sick to my stomach, to my spirit, to witness and hear these stories, these horrific stories of people not even being able to take a shower for longer than 5 minutes because they would break out in hives, and coming back home, breathing in the toxic fumes of the actual refining of these tar sands, was painful, in a deeper level. And so, the way that I began to build solidarity with communities, uh, I had a lot to learn. I had to sit and listen and hear where people were at in their communities and their movements, and how I could use my skills, my media making skills, my art skills, to be able to amplify their voice and amplify their messages, was something that I continue to do throughout my work. I'm part of a core leadership group with a group that's led by Indigenous women of color, called Another Gulf is Possible. And through that, we're able to connect to the communities and the places that we move through. And that sort of taught me a lot about how to build relationships, and also have transformative relationships where we're all healing together, we're all working and collaborating together in ways that before, maybe we didn't do it as well. And as part of the youth organizing, I I help to support a youth organizing with Los Jardines Institute, which is a youth organization based in New Mexico that focuses on land-based work and environmental justice education for youth. So they taught me, how to always implement and move with this sense of intergenerational movement building, where we're learning from our elders, we're honoring our elders, and then also implementing what we're learning to the youth and the people that are younger than us, and trying to bring them into the work that we're doing. The same goes for the language justice work that we do. We try to figure out ways to bring in young people so that they can also enable this skill and be able to do the same things that we're working towards, and also continue to learn from them, because technology is always coming up with new things and new ways, and so we're always co-learning on ways to stay connected and ways to to help support these movements and these grassroots efforts, because we're pretty much what we have right now. We're seeing that the governments are not coming to our aid, and we're creating our own networks of support, so that we can amplify a lot of the work that needs to be done in different communities.
Thanks, Judith. Brian?
Aha. I also like just listening to you all. Thank you for sharing the space with me. And I guess I did want to say a couple of things, and then I think it'll answer in most part the question. But I mentioned, growing up, I went to a very small Lutheran school, and then attended a Catholic high school. I also went to like a Catholic charismatic church throughout that whole time as well. And I remember, being very, very attached and feeling connected during the church services, particularly like when we were singing. And that all started to fall apart as I got older, and I began to witness behaviors from, you know, people I respected, and people who were, you know, supposed to be my teachers. And it really caused me to question and think about not just religion, but, you know, authority in general. And as I got older, you know, that critique gets even more sophisticated. And I realized a lot of that information was deliberately kept from me and from, you know, so many communities, that it made me angry and betrayed in a way. And I had to reckon with that, right? Because I know that, you know, for people in my family, it's been a very big part of their life. And my father, you know, he was actually studying to be a priest. He went to a seminary in San Antonio. And my mom has always been a very spiritual person. She's the one who took me to church, and introduced me to like liberation theology with the charismatic church. And so I think, you know, for me, it's been really complicated, and some of the points that Casey made are still, you know, very, very important discussions, and there are specific things that should happen, and if they don't, and if there's no effort from, you know, people of faith who are part of these religious communities, then you have to ask yourself why. You know, what's more important to you, the justice of all of our humanity, or, you know, our dependence on or loyalty to a particular physical space, or, you know, organized religion. And I remember, you know, there's so many other things, right, that I think we can look at, like the looting of our intellectual and spiritual knowledge that was taken, you know, from Mesoamerica, where my people are from. That's probably still hiding in some Vatican cave, right? Like our sacred texts that were burned, that we will never see, but probably some that we don't even know about that are still there. Our artifacts. I know Moctezuma's headdress is still in Wien. I tried to go see it. You know, so there are a lot of things that I think we need to recognize that are still painful memories of the past, but have yet to be addressed or dealt with in a constructive, positive way, you know, so that healing can begin, so that trust can be brought back. And I think of this song that I heard not long ago. I've been listening to a lot of John Trudell, because he's just a brilliant thinker. And he has this one song that spells it out pretty plainly, for how I understand it. It's called Look at Us. And I encourage you to check it out. It's on YouTube. You can listen to it whenever you want. But I felt, you know, that people were using Jesus, were using Catholicism, were using, you know, all of the religions for their own personal power, and manipulating people, and not being honest, right? On the beginning, on forthright. And so that to me is a very, that's a bad start. It's a bad start. And so I would say, you know, having gone to Canada and visited South America, there's a distinction on how far removed people are from organized religion. And there's a really subtle part in the film. I don't know if you remember, but Melina's with Patricia, and Patricia is giving Melina a tour, and Patricia goes, "That's our church group. They're meeting here for prayer right now." And Melina goes, huh, we used to have one. And they keep walking. But, you know, with just that one little phrase, like I understood, at least I thought I understood based on my own experience, what was happening. So, you know, we know that there has been huge attempts at addressing the schools that our children were forced to go to strip us of our indigenous culture and language and, you know, lifeways. But to relate all of that back to, you know, this film and sort of the topic of the environmental crisis that we're in, I think it's very much related, because what we have taken, you know, from all of us, not just from the indigenous communities who have been stripped of their epistemologies and their way of relating to the land and the earth and animals and each other, that's done us all a disservice, you know. If we think about the importance of biodiversity, that holds true for the intellectual diversity, the spiritual diversity that is also required for, you know, this planet to survive. And that's what we are fighting against, you know, this very strong force to make everything sort of monolithic, one way. And for me, like that's the most damaging thing that we can do. And I saw, you know, I see how easy it is to fall into that trap, because if you find something that brings you joy and pleasure and just spiritual peace, why wouldn't you want to share that? I get that, I understand that. But there's a problem when you use that energy in attempt to colonize or force those beliefs and systems and emotions, right, onto others. That's a personal journey that we all have to take on our own. And I have felt, you know, throughout my life that I have been limited in my options because of what's available. And that's a disservice to us all. So those are kinds of the things that I thought about as it relates to this particular conversation. But obviously there was so much more that I learned. And I'll say in my last point is that Patricia actually came to Houston before I went to her territory. And I think that really set off something in my head about the responsibility of myself and organizations here in the States, but particularly folks living in places like Houston who have extracted so much wealth from the world because of fossil fuels. And so for me, it was a responsibility to understand what was happening in other parts so that I could better inform people here, you know, about all of the things, you know, we're doing, all of the wonderful museums and you know, attractions that Houston has been paid for by taking wealth from other places. That has to be acknowledged, and that shouldn't just come to us. So that was something, you know, that motivated me to go to these places. It wasn't about, you know, being on an adventure. It's more of a sense of responsibility and understanding of what was potentially going to be lost to if we didn't try to help and protect it. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, Brian. So I know I'm mindful that we should close out the call soon. I do want to ask Patricia if you would speak next to share any reactions or thoughts you have about the role of organized religion in your communities in the Amazon. I know we have REPAM, the Catholic Church in the Amazon has been supportive. Many members of the church came tonight, so I want to thank them all for coming and engaging and give you the opportunity to respond to some of what Brian brought up, and to also give any final message you have for the 161 people listening right now.
Gracias, Ali.
Thank you, Ali. Yes, really, I think that
muchas cosas, y entre esas es que soy parte de la red eclesial panamazónica. He estado 2 veces en el Vaticano. Mi pueblo se supone que es católico, y yo crecí con un papá que es Yachak, que es como un líder de sabiduría de la naturaleza, pero que no se conflictuó tanto en el tema espiritual. Y al analizar comprendí que los hombres son los que armaron todo este conflicto espiritual, no la espiritualidad. Y que la espiritualidad era una sola. Si vamos a la historia, han cometido barbaridades. Y hay un profundo resentimiento de los pueblos indígenas y una desconfianza absoluta. Pero también entendí que se tiene que cambiar, porque eso no nos permitía crecer. Tenía que cambiar la iglesia, las iglesias, las religiones, de no pensar que somos dueños de la absoluta verdad, sino que cada parte tiene como un rompecabezas esa pequeña verdad que podrían juntar para poder realmente estar conectados. Y eso me permitió participar.
really see the full truth, and that allowed me to participate. Obviously, speaking about things the way that they really are without forgetting the past, but without also succumbing to resentment and also being able to construct a better future. And my experience at a spiritual level has been very rich. I've had the blessing of being able to understand and know the natural part of the Etcha, and also understand and know other people. My father calls it not being divided, not being disconnected. We are beings of the earth, but we're also spiritual beings. Our energy comes from all of nature, from the eagle, from the jaguar, from the large tree.
Una energía celestial, un espíritu. Entonces, cuando nosotros nos morimos, todo va a regresar a su hábitat. Va a volver a la laguna. Cuando alguien fuerte muere, nosotros lo sentimos, cómo la naturaleza reacciona, porque se está devolviendo aquellas energías, pero también la otra energía se va a todo. Es un poquito complejo, pero yo me entiendo de esa manera con mi familia. Y esa parte no tienen que negar. Hemos sido claros de que no solo tiene que haber un interés de evangelizar el Amazonas, tiene que haber un interés de ser aliados, iguales, amigos, de entendernos, de abrir su mente, de no quedarse encerrado en su absoluta verdad y de ser también actores de cambios, de acompañamientos. Yo espero que eso pueda ser así, que todos podamos estar juntos, sin importar qué tendencia religiosa tengamos. Si somos de la línea de los chamanes, si somos los católicos, los adventistas, los protestantes, los evangélicos, los musulmanes, todos, porque todos compartimos una casa común. A todos se nos dio la misma energía y no podemos cerrarnos en nuestra absoluta verdad. Y eso me motiva. Yo soy muy abierta y obviamente entiendo cuando dicen toda la desconfianza que se tiene, pero hay que dar ese pasito, esa posibilidad. Es tiempo de cambios. Yo espero que todos cambiemos para bien. Gracias.
Thank you so much. Casey, do you have any final words for everyone?
Muchísimas gracias. Casey, ¿tienes algunas últimas palabras?
I just want to say thank you. I was looking at your name, Ali, and thinking, in some ways that says ally. And it made me feel good. I think that in this big circle that I can't see is as powerful a spirit as we could possibly hope for. I'm hoping that through these connections, like the eagle and the condor, or the condor and the eagle, that unifies us in prophecy, that we're going to go forward into a very old way of being that takes us into a new place for our children and great-great-great-great-grandchildren to have air to breathe, water to drink, food to eat, and a knowledge and oneness with the great mystery. Thank you all.
Thank you, Casey. Judith, do you have any closing words?
It may be a little loud where I'm at. Hopefully it's not too loud, but I just wanted to say thank you all. And I feel really honored again to be in such an amazing space. We do have the international debut of the premiere on July 1st, where Patricia will also join us, and other folks from Ecuador and the Amazon who will be speaking about their issues and sharing more of their stories. And y'all are welcome to join then if you missed the movie now or just want to also be a part of that conversation. And I can post the link on the chat box. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Judith. Yes, if all of our presenters, if you have any information you want to share about how people can follow your work, how they can be in touch with you, if you would please write a message in the chat. I know many people would love to follow you on Instagram or however else you want to stay in touch and have them support you. And Brian, do you have any words to share with us as we say goodnight?
No, just that we have a lot of work to do still, and I would hope that in this process of this congregation coming together, that there are principles put in place on how to engage with indigenous communities, so that religion isn't forced upon communities, and that there is support that is mutually beneficial, and honors and respects the diversity of communities' spiritual well-being, emotional well-being, and so on. I may already have that, but that's definitely worth putting together, and of course with the advice and support of indigenous communities too. We've all experienced things that we know have harmed our communities, and so being proactive about trying to prevent that as much as possible, I think that's the best I can ask of folks, and I'm willing to help work on that too, if there's a need for other folks to get involved. But other than that, thank you, and I hope the film brought something for the rest of y'all's convening that you can work with, and we'll see you out in the streets as soon as this COVID-19 is is done its thing. Yeah, be safe.
We'll see you online.
Yes. Thank you all so much. It's such a blessing and an honor. I'm not worthy to be convening this panel. I really, really am so grateful and honored to be in.
Thank you, Ali.
I do want to make one last invitation for anyone who feels called to donate. The donations will support Patricia and the Sariaku community. It will go to the Four Winds American Indian Council in Denver, Colorado, in relationship to the CatholicNetwork.us, and it will support UU Indigenous Solidarity in Lakota territory, in Ojibwe territory, in Carrizo Comecrudo territory, in all the ways that that we're working as a Unitarian Universalist faith and a multi-faith movement to show up and build solidarity with Indigenous peoples. So here one last time is the donation link. Thank you all so much for coming. And Clement technically needs to be ending the session, so I hope he's awake and listening and can help us to stop the recording and the live stream. But yes, that is all for now. Thank you all so much, and good night.